Alright everyone, today is launch day of the 9950 and 9900X. Some controversy around the CPU, about its performance gains. I would say if you're not in a rush to buy, then wait. But obviously I cannot stress enough the importance of reading written reviews from like Tech Power Up and Antech, and not just go off what you see on YouTube. Because I hate to say it, but most YouTubers who do reviews of these things, they're not exactly, well, if you think about it, right, they're catering to a gaming audience, right, and CPUs do more than gaming. So they're not testing all the workloads that would be reflective of increases for these CPUs. Now, obviously, if you're just a gamer, you should wait for the X3D chips, or even now, the 7800 X3D is still a good buy. But definitely, I'll give you an example. All right, I'll just give you a real-world example. So for things like code compile, NoSQL performance, stuff like some of the AI learning items, and some of the 3D CAD programs like Fusion 3D or something like that, these CPUs are a pretty good boost from last generation 7000 series at pretty much a reduced amount of power load. So if you were to consider that, like, not just, well, I'm buying one CPU for myself, like for me, for my company, right, not my own company, but for the company I work for, when we purchase workstations, CPUs, etc., I'm just going to rant while I put this in. Let me see, make sure, is that right? Yeah, okay. I've already flashed the BIOS to a beta version. It's not the most stable one, but we'll give it a shot. For me, you know, a 20-30 watt savings across, I don't know, 30,000 endpoints, that's a big deal, okay? So if you want to think about it in a very narrow-minded mindset of just, oh, gaming performance, then you're kind of missing the big picture, right? And additionally, addressing DC, I always do the rice. Addressing some of the other issues with these CPUs, like right now, there is a known issue where the core-to-core latency is about 100 nanoseconds higher than the 7th gen, right? And that's a big problem. That comes from the PPM driver for the core parking. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to test it without that first, and then test it with the core parking on, right? But you know, like I said, I do game, but that's not my primary use case. So for me, you know, this is an improvement regardless. But like I said, it really helps to read written reviews, because, you know, if you only watch and consume YouTube, unless you find someone who's, I'm not saying that's me, unless you find someone that's very knowledgeable in, you know, hardware design, something like that, you're not going to get the full picture even, right? You really need to, I'm not saying the folks that write reviews know everything, but there's a reason why some of them have been doing this for 20 years plus, right? They have a good understanding of not just, you know, gaming performance, benchmarking. They have a good understanding of architecture. They look into things like, you know, whether or not your Xbox game mode or whatever it is, game mode is running properly. I believe these also require set version. Right? These are things that just gloss over when you watch regular YouTube folks. They just say, oh, core parking, and they move on. It's like, no, it's more complicated than that. So yeah, that's why I said you always need to, you know, I know reading isn't as fun as watching, but you kind of need to do that. So here I'm just going to tighten it. You know, I heard that Watercool was supposed to release some newer generation blocks. I guess not yet. I'm looking forward to Heatkiller 5. So I'm just thumb tightening. I'm not going to over tighten, obviously. Okay, so I'm going to pull this as well. This M2, if I can pull it out. Please tell me I can pull it out with it. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I have this one preloaded. That's why I'm taking that one out. Oh, sorry, shaking the camera there. So I can put this back in. For those of you wondering, for storage wise, I have two M2s in here, one M2 there. The reason I don't have another M2 in the bottom slot is because attaching the M2_2 into this, oh shoot, I will have to pull this. Attaching M2_2 puts the PCIe into running X8. Now that it's in there, I'm going to reattach the tubes for the CPU, which I think came in like this. You guys can hear that nice little click. Nice click here. Will not secure that all the way down yet while I secure the other one. So I'm going to do a dry boot just to make sure it posts. It's normally safe to do. Oh shoot, I had a little bit of distilled water in there. Let me clean that up. Yeah, sometimes I run the tubes through distilled water, so it's okay. It's not gonna hurt it. But let me clean this up a little bit. Normally, after I sand the tube, etc., I run through distilled water just to clear it out a little bit. All right, so I got the CPU in. I'm gonna just do a quick test start. I know everything boots with the older gen processor, but obviously this is the newer generation, so I need to test that first. I don't want to fill it before I test, because otherwise it's going to be, you have to drain it all just to deal with it. I'm also testing not just for boot, because this thing, I can't take it out without the tubes being removed. So I'm also making sure all my drives are picked up, because my NVMe's not picked up from this thing, I'm going to have to take back out. So let's just see here. The first boot is always going to take a little bit, because especially for both platforms, but for AMD a little longer, it tends to need to train the RAM a little bit longer. If you don't have a motherboard like the Extreme or Formula, you won't have a display. Well, maybe if you're the Aorus, but the good thing about these high-end boards, although they're overkill for most people, is that instead of looking at a Q code, like a Q code that you may need to refer to a manual, or if you do it often enough, you know them. You can just see here that it's testing CPU, and wherever it gets stuck, it's going to fail, and it's going to light up on the lights right here. So that's green. So BIOS is updating. Do not shut down the system. Okay, so it did post, so we're good. Unfortunately, I can't shut it off. So hopefully, I mean, it should be okay. The CPU doesn't take that much power when it's doing something like this. So while I'm running it with just the block on, nothing's going to melt. Everything's metal. So we'll be okay. And it's good to see my fans are also all working. Sometimes these Lian Li fans, if they're not lined up a little bit off, they cannot spin. So that's nice to see. Obviously the lights haven't kicked on because that requires the software. But with that said, I think I am going to go red instead of blue. And let's just see here. We'll come back. So it's updated the BIOS. It's cycling again. VGA. BIOS is updating LED firmware. Okay, I guess all the lights came on now. So all the lights work, at least for the top set of fans. Okay, so I see that LCD screens came on for the bottom fans. So we'll see why. Maybe when we install the software and everything, this will light up. Speaking of software, because this is a different architecture, I strongly suggest you install Clean. Because if you have things like core parking issues, that's going to be really hard to narrow down if you're coming from a last generation install, and sometimes it's hard to clear out all the chipset drivers even though it's the same chipset. So just do a clean install when you're changing to a brand new CPU from a different generation. If you're doing like 14700 to 14900, well, it doesn't really matter. But okay, new CPU installed, FTAPM structure, press yes to reset FTAP. Okay, so everything's booting okay. Let's see, we get into the BIOS. I can check my firmware. I mean, not firmware. Check my NVMe drives. And there's my cat. Okay, so let's see. Okay, CPU over temperature. Okay, so I see it picked up all the ones in my M2 drive. That's good enough. Time to shut off. All right, so I see on the post screen it picked up my 3 NVMe's, 3 Vipers here and there. So now we're good to, once again, since I just replaced these tubes and took them out, even though I didn't change anything, it's best to test leak again. Do a leak test before you fill. Anytime you take a tube out, you even if it's just the same blocks, do yourself a favor and do a leak test, because you don't know if something went wrong when you put it back in, even if it looks like nothing went wrong. So I'm going to do a leak test, and if that works out, I'm going to start filling. Alright guys, so you can see I filled most of the loop. I do have some space left. I'm going to be adding dye now. What you should do when you add dye is you add it, well, 1 or 2 drops at a time. But I know this takes quite a bit, so I'm not too scared of, sorry if I get in the way here, I'm not too scared of overdoing it a little bit. So you can see I'm dropping in the red. And it does get darker as it runs, so you can always drop a little bit and then come back. Don't just kind of go at the bottle and then feel that it's not dark enough and just keep adding, because before you know it, it will get darker than you wanted. It does take some time for it to kind of fill throughout the loop. So you can see right now the reservoir is very red, right? See, it's very strong, the dyes. You can see the reservoir is very red. But if I were to come out a little bit, so while the res is very red, the distro area, which is clear, is kind of pinkish. That could be because of the lighting. So if I turn off the lights, it still looks a little pinkish. It's not that dark yet. So I'm going to let the dye process a little bit. And after it processes some more, I'm going to add a little bit more. Alright guys, so the build is pretty much done. The only issue I did run into was, well, from the build itself, was the fan died on me. The fan that died was the left-right one under the radiator. So that required me to swap the fan out, which I could not have, not under the radiator, sorry, under the motherboard. If I didn't have this low-profile screwdriver that saved my ass, I would have had to drain the loop just to take the fan out. So I will link these screwdrivers. They're a lifesaver, and they're super cheap on Amazon too. So, you know, like I said, this is a new platform. Give it some time. With the newer PPM driver and its GISA updates, there may be better. Well, they're going to have to solve the core latency issue, because that's not small. But also, software needs to be updated to better work with these CPUs. So, unfortunately, how many reviewers do overtime reviews? Not many. So, with that in mind, AMD probably should have done a better job on the launch itself and getting everything ready. For example, I'll give you an example. I don't think most of these boards, their BIOSes with their partners, were updated thoroughly enough. For example, on this X670E Extreme, my temperature throttle limit is 75. Either with the August BIOS or the beta BIOS, setting it to manual and raising it to 95 degrees does absolutely nothing. It still sticks at 75. I also noticed that I'm having harder time. It's taking longer to train the same set of RAM that I've ran on multiple 7-down series without issues. So there's definitely some bugs. There's definitely some twerks that take time. So with that said, thanks for watching. Stay safe and take care.